There are some great stories in the motorsport history books of two drivers simply kicking 7 colours of out of each other. Or rivals in any sport really, because players, teams, individuals will be looking to get one up over their fierce rivals, and it will always result in handbags. In terms of racing, you've got Jason Plato and Matt Neal, Marcus Ambrose and Greg Murphy, Russell Ingall and Mark Scaife. Hang on a minute, these are all touring car drivers. I can see a pattern emerging here, or something like Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt. Stuff where, on occasion, it can get physical and have some fireworks. Ambrose and Murphy, where they almost started throwing punches on the outside of the cutting at Bathurst, Plato and Neal with their tiff at Rockingham in 2011, and Ingall swerving his Ford Falcon towards Scaife at Eastern Creek after he dumped Scaife out of the race, for which he copped the biggest fine in V8 supercars history. Hang on, these are all examples from the guys I've just mentioned. But in Formula 1, it very rarely gets physical. Max Verstappen pushing and shoving Esteban Ocon is probably the most recent example. You very rarely see a punch get thrown, or a kick if you're Nelson Piquet at Hockenheim. But I guess that's because Formula 1 drivers prefer to do things on the down low, a bit of psychological maiming, doing stuff from the shadows like a 200-mile-an-hour Sam Fisher. And this is exactly what happened at the 2007 Hungarian Grand Prix. For the 2007 season, most would have assumed pre-season that the fight was going to be between Alonso and Raikkonen. Alonso because he was already a 2-time champion and had beaten Schumacher on both of those occasions, and Raikkonen because he was moving to a Ferrari team that had come incredibly close the previous year. Schumacher had only just missed out in the twilight of his career, so there's no reason that Kimi shouldn't be able to get close as well, and those two were the best drivers on the grid at that time. It would be the first season in 15 years that Michael Schumacher wasn't on the grid, although he was going to be around as an advisor to Ferrari and also helping to coach Felipe Massa. So this in turn left everybody speculating as to whether another era like Michael's would ever be seen again, and whether or not Fernando would still be the top driver on the grid. Could he go on his own domination run, or would the shift go towards one of the other teams? With BMW now at Sauber, where would they end up after being with Williams? There was also some decent young drivers on the grid coming through, and now all the cars were on Bridgestone rubber. So how would the cars that had been running Michelins for the last 5 or 6 years adapt? Ferrari had been the Bridgestone team, and McLaren and Renault had been on Michelins for so long, so would their cars handle the switch or not? Would Ferrari have been given a little bit of a head start? However, there was a wild card, a 22-year-old kid from Stevenage who had come up through McLaren's youth programme and had won GP2 the previous year. McLaren was entrusting the second car to a rookie who had done some stuff in the junior categories that had made everybody go, hang on, who's this? Because, yikes. Sending it 3 wide at Maggots, the comeback driving Turkey, and alas the first challenge in a reverse grid kart race in 1998 in absolutely pissing rain. But at the same time, people were thinking, nah, this is Alonso's team, he's the world champion, he's going to be the one they favour, because not many people get to win titles with 2 different teams. Very few go back to back with 2 different teams. This guy will do as he's told, and he'll be Alonso's rear gunner. He's another David Coulthard. So imagine the shock when this kid sent it around the outside of Alonso turn 1 of his first ever Formula 1 Grand Prix. But it was clear that this driver pair had something over the rest of the field. At the same time, there was going to be the inevitable bust-ups. On one hand, you've got Alonso. He's the world champion and should, by default, be the team leader. But on the other side is this kid, Lewis Hamilton, who was Ron Dennis's pet project and the most exciting new prospect since Schumacher, who had, ironically, retired the season before. Both drivers were trading places at the top of the standings, with the McLarens lapping the entire field at Monaco before the Canadian Grand Prix, where Hamilton took his first ever win. Alonso, meanwhile, sustained damage early on in that race where he overdid it into turn 1 and damaged his floor cutting across the grass. Now, I've had to go back and re-watch that footage so I know exactly what happened there, because I was always under the assumption that Lewis forced Fernando wide, causing him to take avoiding action across the grass. But in reality, Alonso straight up blew the corner, had to go across the grass and ended up damaging his floor. He lost a position to Nick Heidfeld at the start, and then later on in the race lost a position to Takuma Sato, who was in a Super Aguri. It was a weird race. Ferrari did come back at the French and British Grand Prix before Alonso took only his 3rd win of the season at the Nürburgring, a race that I've covered in the last 12 months or so. You know, the one where Markus Winkelhock led in a spiker and then a multitude of cars went off in the pouring rain at turn 1, in a, very scary foreshadowing of the events of Japan 2014. After that race, Hamilton led Alonso by just 2 points. 70 placed 68, with Massa in third on 59 and Kimi on 52. Interestingly, despite Kimi being rapid over one lap as he often was at McLaren, Massa had got more pole positions in 2007 so far, and both of them had 2 wins apiece. But things had got tense even before the teams had arrived in Hungary. After the Monaco Grand Prix, Hamilton had made a comment regarding team orders costing him his first World Championship victory. I can't find the transcript of that particular interview, so I don't know whether the tone was, yeah, I had the potential to win today, but the team orders were such yada 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 yada, it's a great win for the team, #bless, best fans, and so on, or if it was, oh man, I was straight up screwed today. Either way, Alonso was rattled by those comments. Nobody was counting on how fast Hamilton was going to be that year. He was rapid over one lap and could be fast in the opening parts of a stint, but in hotter conditions he would slip back because he couldn't get his head around the tyres and how to manage them. I remember Hamilton being hyped at that time as he was the new British driver in one of the faster cars on the grid, but it was a case of, yeah, sure, we had several years of Coulthard at McLaren. Oh, actually this kid's pretty quick. Alonso had told Spanish media, I have a British teammate in the British team and he's doing a great job. We know that all the support and help is going to him. Hamilton, as already mentioned, had won in Canada and then went and won again at Indianapolis, so it wasn't an impossibility that he could potentially do back-to-back Formula 3, 2 and 1 championships. But we have to factor something else rumbling in the background. 780 pages of rumbling. But anyway, on to Hungary, and the problems here with Hamilton and Alonso all begin in the so-called fuel-burning phase of qualifying that they had back then. It was still the 3-tier knockout qualifying that we have today, but in 2007 the teams had to put in their starting race fuel. The final session was 15 minutes long, so teams would put in their race fuel and then drive around on older tyres that they didn't need anymore to burn off as much fuel as they possibly could, then pit for brand new tyres, and then bang in their fastest laps with the lower fuel levels on board. Then, after qualifying, they topped the fuel back up to where it should be for the race start. An utterly pointless rule that had come in for like the 2003 season or something in an attempt at jumbling up the field. The FIA changed that fuel burn thing for 2008. They reduced the 3 sessions to 20 minutes for the first, 15 for the second, and 10 for the third to avoid this fuel burn portion of the qualifying session because, let's be honest, it was causing people to fall asleep. It was supposed to be the session where the cars are at the fastest they'll go all weekend, but they'd have about 15 laps worth of fuel on board and were then spending the first 10 minutes of that session pootling around and not pushing to try and get the cars as light as possible. I'm glad it's gone. McLaren meanwhile had this system where at certain tracks one of the cars would be given an extra lap of fuel, and they also had a system where one of the drivers would go out first, the other one second, and then they swap around and then do it again and again and again and again. A lot of other teams have this and it can cause a bit of a problem at places like Monza where you need a tow. At Hungary, it was Alonso's turn to be the lead car. Hamilton was let out of the garages first, which was against the plan, and when both cars were out on track, Hamilton initially refused to let Alonso by, claiming that if he did, Raikkonen would get in front of them both and that would mess both McLaren cars about. Alonso was not happy, and would let the team know this when they had to pit for fresh tyres in the third qualifying session. In the third session, Hamilton had been the quicker driver, and the final laps with the maximum amount of rubber on track and also the lower fuel levels were almost guaranteed to be faster. And Alonso probably knew this too. So when the two cars came round to take their tyres, it should have been a case of bolt Alonso's tyres on and send him out, which gives him more than enough of a gap to Hamilton, and both cars would have enough time to get round and start a lap before the time expires. So long as they start the lap before the red lights come on, they'll be fine. Remember Russia a few years back when Hamilton crossed the line with about 3 seconds to spare? So Alonso comes into his pit box, Hamilton is in behind as they double stack, and Alonso takes his brand new tyres. When the lollipop went up, Alonso stayed there. He was there for 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and then 10 seconds. And then he went. Alonso managed to get another lap on the board, but Hamilton wasn't able to get round in time, so Alonso was on pole by about 1/10 of a second. After qualifying, Hamilton was asked how long he missed out on setting another lap, to which he replied, about the same time I was held up in that pit stop, and the stewards saw fit to investigate the issue. Alonso had managed to start his lap with 2 seconds left, while Hamilton missed out by 5. They ordered McLaren to hand over all of their radio transmissions. Meanwhile, Ron Dennis actually shielded Alonso in the aftermath, blaming Hamilton and the team for the fiasco, and Alonso claimed he'd been there because he and race engineer Mark Slade had been having a back and forth as to why they'd put old tyres on his car. The FIA basically said, shouldn't you have had that conversation either on track while going around to start your next lap or after qualifying, and then slapped Alonso with a 5-place grid penalty. They also slapped Fisichella with the same penalty for impeding Sakon Yamamoto. So it meant that Alonso was going to start in 6th and Hamilton would start on pole. McLaren were then told they couldn't get any constructors' points for this race because they were deemed to have lied to the stewards about certain parts of the story that led to Alonso doing the old blockaroo, or pit lane gate as it was called. McLaren raced under appeal, and Hamilton led every single lap to take his 3rd win of the season, the first time that someone had done so throughout the entirety of 2007. But it wasn't an easy win, as Raikkonen was pushing him all the way. Alonso finished 4th, costing him valuable points in the championship. Some might go as far as to think that without all of this stuff, he might have won his 3rd championship, taking a grid penalty at the hardest track to overtake at this side of Monaco. But this was pretty much the beginning of the end for the relationship between Ron and Fernando. Ron was suitably pissed off himself because of what had happened, and on the Sunday morning, Fernando and Dennis had been involved in quite the argument in Ron's office. At some point during that argument, Alonso had mentioned that he'd got some emails pertaining to 780 pieces of Ferrari-branded paper. Whether this was intentional blackmail or something just said in the heat of the moment during that argument, we'll never know. That is, unless a tell-all book is released. But either way, Ron, on hearing this information, decided, bollocks, I need to tell Max about this. So he calls up Mosley and says, look, this has happened, and this opened up the arc to the point where everybody's face melted. This probably caused a switch in the dynamic at McLaren as well. Lewis had been leading the 2 drivers, and Dennis effectively said, right, get Lewis to the championship. I still want a McLaren driver winning this. And they ended up racing Fernando more than Ferrari, to the point that Hamilton's car went sliding into the gravel in China to drop points to Raikkonen and effectively lose himself the title. Although some people think that this was deliberately fluffing things because, $100 million, booted out the championship and still winning a driver's title would not have been a good look. Dennis also said in 2015 that it was Lewis that fired the first shots, but doing so by being quick. In a 2010 interview, he said that Fernando hadn't been expecting Lewis to be that fast and that Alonso had been calculating everything, but when he saw how quick that Lewis had been, that started to get under his skin. But as already mentioned, this was probably the least of McLaren's concerns throughout the 2007 because of the whole Spygate thing and the resulting fines and being kicked out the championship and everything else that came with it. Although, looking at the Spygate thing and seeing what was allegedly said and bits and pieces like that, it looks like the fallout from Spygate might have been personal as well. The 2007 season, where you didn't need Netflix to cause drama. So then, a look at the 2007 Hungarian Grand Prix and how it was the catalyst for the explosion that was Spygate. If this has taught you something new about days gone by, then do like the video so I know a good job was done. And if you want to see more from the channel, subscribe, get that bell on, so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever to the rad lads at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help contribute to the picture purchasing piggy bank and other bits and pieces, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, my socials, and also affiliate links if you want to buy some bits and pieces, and then I get a little bit of a kickback. Well, there's memberships and also super thanks down there if you just want to do a one-off tip. Much thanks to the people that have done one of these super thanks in the last couple of days. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.